Since I've covered the basics of animation, animating the position, rotation, and such of objects, I want to go in a little bit more depth with animating objects that have been parented together to create one object hierarchy. So right now you can see I have this little penguin character, and he's got a body, and you can see the body is the main object in the parent tree, the highest object in the hierarchy. It's the parent of all of them. And if I turn the little arrow down, you can see all the different objects that I have in here. Now, it looks like a whole lot more objects than there are actually that you can see here, and that's because since objects don't have a way to move your pivot point, for example, with the wing here, I would want it to pivot around this section up here. I wouldn't want it to pivot in the center of the object. Well, Amorphium doesn't allow you to move the pivot point, so what I've done, if I hide the body here real quick like, now each of these objects I have a little pivot object, and what I've done is use a sphere to create an object, like a dummy object, so to speak. And so if I scroll down here to the wings and turn the little, so now you can see this little sphere here. Now this is the parent object of the wing. So this little object is parented, the little pivot object is parented to the body, which I've now hidden so you can see it. And the wing, the left wing, is connected to and parented to this little sphere, so I can use its pivot point to rotate the wing. So if I go ahead and do a rotation on this, you can see now that it is pivoting on that sphere's rotation axis from the center point of the sphere and not the center point of the wing itself. So that's the workaround for creating pivot points for objects, is to actually create an object to use as your dummy pivot point object. Now the other thing too is, if you notice here, I've turned it off in the render. This row here represents again whether or not the object is going to render in your scene. So I have it turned off so that it's not going to be visible in the scene. And also, something to keep in mind too, you're going to want to come in here and turn off cast and receive shadows, ray trace interaction, and if you're using radiosity at all, radiosity interaction. And what this will do is it'll not only speed up the render, but it's going to keep it from interacting in the scene as well, even when it's turned off, because again, objects will ray trace even if they're hidden in the render. They'll show up in your reflections and refraction and whatnot, and so you want to turn all that off just so that it can't interact with the scene in any way. So since I don't need to really see it, I'm going to go ahead and turn it off so that it makes it easier to animate in my scene here. And I'll go ahead and turn the body back on. So I'm going to go ahead and create just a quick little animation. I could really go into depth and really animate this guy waddling in and whatnot, but I'm just going to do a quick little animation to show you kind of how parenting animation works. So the first thing I'm going to do is I want to show you one thing that can be a little bit of a hindrance in Amorphium, and it's something that happens once in a while, and something to watch out for with parenting objects. Now, this is a problem with Amorphium, and I know that's something that will probably get fixed later on, but if I were to, just to show you as a quick example, I'm going to use rotation tool, and I'll go back to the first keyframe and show you as an example. If I rotate, I have an object that has all the eyes, eyelids, and beak parented to it, so I can rotate them all as a whole. So you can see I can rotate them around and animate them as a whole. But one of the problems with this is that if I rotate this on some weird axis, like in a nice rotation like this, and then go to rotate the eyelids, because the eyelids are now parented to this and have been rotated, the axis gets skewed just a little bit, and this is a problem with Amorphium, and it can tend to cause some weird results. So if I go ahead and rotate the eyelid object now, after rotating the face to this parent object for the whole face off to a skewed axis, and then I'm going to go ahead and choose rotating on the X. You'll notice that when I rotate the eyelid now, because the whole parented object has been rotated, it skews the axis just a little bit, so now the eyelid's not rotating on the X evenly. So in order to counteract that, I would have to also rotate it on the Z a little bit to get it to line back up. And that's just something to watch for. It tends to do that once in a while on objects. As you rotate the parent, sometimes it can skew the axis of the children, depending on how off axis you rotate the parent. So that can be something to watch for. So just, you can always rotate the child opposite of it to kind of counteract it, but just watch for it. So it's something to keep in mind. So I'm going to just do a real quick little animation. So what I'm going to do is go to somewhere in my timeline, and actually let's go ahead and do like the beak opening and closing. So I'll go ahead and go down to the bottom beak pivot here, and I'm going to rotate on the X-axis, and it's going to ask me to add a keyframe. So now I'll go ahead and rotate his beak open somewhere right in about here, and then I'll move my timeline somewhere in here. Somewhere like that, and then I'll go ahead and add another keyframe. And we'll close the beak back up again. And let's make his eyes blink. And we'll start the blink somewhere in here. And make sure that I don't have the beak pivot point selected anymore. And I'll go ahead and come down to the eyelid pivots. Now, one thing that for doing like eye blinking that actually might be, it's kind of a good thing to do as far as getting it to be pretty exact. What I like to do is I like to do it numerically, but first you need to create keyframes. So I'm just going to go ahead and select them all and say add keyframe. So it should add a keyframe for all the pivot points, and I'll deselect them all now. And come into the numeric section here, and since it's the X axis I want to rotate, I'm going to go ahead and change this to, let's try 320. So as you can see, what's nice is that as I change it here, before I commit to the changes, you can see it changing up here. So let's make it 60. I think that closes it all the way. Well, a little more than close, so I'll go ahead and go back to about 40. Yeah, somewhere in there. So 340. So I'll remember that for this one. Make it 340. That way I get the bottom eyelids to the same exact rotation, and that's why I like to do the eyelids numerically. The top eyelid, we'll make this one, let's see which direction it's rotating. Let's try 40. Let's see if it rotate the other direction, I'm sure. Oh, there we go. That is right, the right direction. And we'll make this one rotate, let's go 60. And a little bit more. And since 360 and 0 are the same, I can actually start back up at 0 and say, oh, 10. And that'll go even further. So I'll make it 15. Close enough. We'll do the same thing for here, 15. Now, since the eyelids aren't going to change from the beginning of the animation, I can actually grab the very first keyframe and drag it out, since they're going to stay open the whole time until this point. the first keyframe doesn't even have to be until this point. So I'm going to drag them out here. I wanted a fairly quick blink, so somewhere like that. And do that for all of these. And one last one. Now, here's a little trick as well for creating keyframes fairly quickly. I could go in and actually create a new keyframe here and type in 300 again for the rotation, but if I want it to be the exact same as this keyframe, and I mentioned this in the other animation section, but it's good to mention again because it's kind of a neat trick, is to drag that keyframe to the end here, and then now, since that keyframe is the last keyframe, if I create a keyframe here, it's going to, if I go ahead and create a keyframe here by doing add keyframe, now that keyframe is the same as this one because there was no other keyframe after it. So I can drag this guy back. So another, don't have to be too exact, but at least not for this particular demo. So another way to create a keyframe a little bit faster. Okay, so let me go ahead and create the keyframes for the other eyelids here. So I'm just going to go ahead and do it by doing the control click or right click on the PC. In here, and they don't have to be too exact, at least not for this. So actually I can move this guy until it lines up like so. Okay, so let me go ahead and now we'll set these guys back. These were 300. 323, I think it was. So somewhere in there, let's take a look, make sure it's pretty close. Yeah, close enough. And then I'll do the last one. 323 also. Okay. So then we have a nice little eye blink going in there. Okay, so now let's make his whole head kind of look at the camera at the same time, kind of rotate his head around. So I'm going to go ahead now and create a keyframe for the head pivot. And since I want it to start rotating from the very beginning, well, actually we'll go ahead and have it not quite start rotating from the very beginning. We'll start it like, make a keyframe somewhere right about in here. And we're going to do a rotation, so I'll go select the rotation tool. Say add keyframe. And then I'm also going to come down here somewhere and create another keyframe. Say add keyframe, and then I'm going to rotate the head. Make him kind of look at the camera. And let's also make a couple keyframes for his wings. So I'll scroll down here to the wing pivots. And just to quickly, and also I want to make sure that I don't have the head pivot selected. So I'm going to come down here, select both wing pivots, so I can quickly create keyframes for them both. So I've created 2 keyframes there, and I'm going to also create a couple over here somewhere. So what I'll do now, deselect one of them, go to rotation, and let's rotate them along the z-axis so I can open his wing a little bit. And we'll select the other wing. Do the same kind of thing. And we'll go back to the first keyframe and do the same, kind of rotate the wings out a little. So his wings are rotated out at the beginning. But because I created that keyframe with them kind of rotated in the middle there, they'll be rotated in the middle. So, okay. So now got a little animation of this guy. And the very last thing I'm going to do, might be kind of nice to have his mouth open a little bit at the end too. And let's move the beak pivot in a little. And go back to the end here. And I'll go ahead and create another keyframe for the beak pivot point. And we'll change to a rotation on the, we're going to rotate it now on the X. Open his beak a little bit here at the end. Okay, so now I've got a nice little animation of this guy, and since we're kind of stopping here somewhere at frame 1.21 seconds, I'll go ahead and move the end of my timeline here in a little closer. So somewhere. So now we've got this nice little animation of this guy. So let me go ahead and render this. And actually, I'll go ahead and save my project. Always want to remember to save your projects. And I'll go ahead and render. Now, since I wanted to render this guy as a flash, I'll go to Flash Animation. And I have my settings the way I want it. And I'll go ahead and hit render. And now it's going to ask me for a name, so I'll call it Penguin Anim. And hit save, and it'll start the render. Okay, so now you can see the final rendered animation here in the Flash format. I could have gotten a little more elaborate and actually, maybe made him walk on the screen and whatnot, but this gives you a good representation of how to animate parented objects so that you can create more advanced animations.